and welcome. This is That Shakespeare Life. I'm Cassidy Cash, and this week we're exploring the history of church bells for Shakespeare's lifetime by asking, did Shakespeare make church bells? Okay, so I had to make the question fit our Did Shakespeare format because, of course, William Shakespeare himself didn't make church bells. And I'm not so much trying to say that. What I am trying to share with you is the really cool history of how church bells were made during Shakespeare's lifetime. A lot of English towns relied on bells, specifically church bells, to do things like mark time. They would also warn of danger and even call people to worship or mark major events like weddings and funerals would often chime off with these church bells. They were a huge part of the town and even people's identity. They identified with the bell tower when they were talking about where they were from or what they knew about their hometown. So it was a hugely important part of the culture. I wanted to look into how church bells were actually made and the process of casting these giant bells, because, of course, this is before the invention of the crane and before the invention of things like large trucks and lorries to haul things from place to place. So I wondered, how did they make these bells and how did they get them into these church towers for the 16th century? To find out how this process worked, I sat down with a historian who specializes in 16th century bell making, and here's what they had to say.
Most of the time, it was the second, because bells were so big and complicated, and it took a week or two to make them, depending how quickly you were working, that you would have a foundry in a big town like London or Leicester or York or such that would make bells when requested for churches around and about, generally within sort of 10, 20-mile range, depending how far people were willing to pay for transport. So probably most of the bells are made in major foundries in major towns, often run by the same family for 2 or 3 generations. Or sometimes they'd only last 5 years and shut up shop for whatever reason. We don't really know why. One in Exeter, I think, ran for about 3 generations, about probably 60 to 80 years in the late 15th, early 16th century. But there were also itinerant bell finders, some of whom made a living just out of traveling to places to cast bells, or else sometimes they just came out from Leicester or York or London or something to cast a bell in the local town or village or something, depending on what the customer wanted, how far away it was, or, to use a itinerant bell founder, if given the costs of carriage and the chance of dropping it off the cart or something, it might actually be cheaper to make it locally. Plus, you could watch the work being done yourself and go, "Oh, are you sure you're doing that right?" And the craft bell finder probably tell you to go away, or else. Also, frankly, if it's very big, because apparently the Great Tom of Lincoln was close to 5 tons or thereabouts, and therefore, if it was that big, carrying it by cart would just be too difficult. So
Well,
it
that
was
was my
easier to
next
make it
thought
locally.
because, yeah, these are not small. Give us, you said that the bell was named Tom of Lincoln. Am I saying this correctly? Was five
Great Tom,
tons.
yes.
Was that average size for church bells, or how big were they?
Well, that's what I was trying to dig into that a bit last week, and actually, it looks more like most of them were more sort of 2 to 3 feet across and sort of roughly 3 to 1,200 weight, which is still only about 150 to about 600 kilograms. Not sure what that translates to in imperial, but not actually that much. Significantly less than a car, because essentially there's an interesting website called Dove's Guide for Church Bell Ringers, which has a huge database of bells across the world. So you narrow the search down to England or British Isles. So I searched for 1550 to 1650 in British Isles, and it listed about 5,310 bells for that century. And a quick scan through it suggested that most were only in sort of half-ton sort of range, nothing too big. So they wouldn't necessarily be too hard to carry, and actually not too bad size-wise.
So you need a solid cart to carry things and a good set of horses, I think, to pull it. But to
Yes.
translate 600 kilograms for you, that's about 1,300 pounds. And I did Google that. I'm not just a math translator so fast, but some things to compare that to, it's about the size of a baby grand piano, or
Mm.
Chat GPT says that it's about the same size as a male polar bear, but I don't personally know that reference. But still very big. I mean, to fit it on the back of a cart, you're not fitting multiples of these into your cart. You're definitely doing one at a time.
Oh, exactly. But then even in Shakespeare's time, a church could have six, eight, 10 of them, maybe. So they would sort of accumulate over time almost. People left money in wills and everything, or they were acquired in various other ways.
If you'd like to hear our entire podcast episode on the making of church bells and the history of how they are hoisted up into the top of the towers, you can listen to the entire podcast at the link below this video. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.